Hey there. If you're a frequent listener to our show, you already know that our show is brought to you by our friends over at Artillery Sports. But what you may not know is that Artillery Sports helps athletes of all types win on and off the course and court. They do this by selling quality, durable, and precision manufactured sports equipment that keeps you in the game, while also using a portion of the profits to provide the funding needed to care for our nation's veterans. With Artillery Sports, it's more than just a game. So head over to artillerysports.com today to buy the quality equipment you need to keep you in the game and to help our nation's veterans at the same time. That's artillerysports.com. Make sure you head on over there today. Oh, and use the code DOCFIRST to get 10% off your first order. Welcome to Documentary First, an inside look at documentary filmmaking. I'm your host, Christian Taylor, a documentary filmmaker myself, and today I am thrilled to welcome to the show writer, producer, and ACE editor, Evan Wise. Welcome to the show, Evan. So glad to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, so before we begin, just give me a minute. I hope you'll indulge me. I've got a little bit of documentary first housekeeping to do. We'll be right back to you. If you're a frequent listener to the show, would you please take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform of choice? I just noticed the other day at a couple of those I went to, we really could use a few more reviews. I know we have a lot of listeners, and so just take a moment if you don't mind and leave us a review. Also, if you're new to our podcasting family, you might not know that we have a Patreon community. So I would encourage you to head on over to patreon.com/documentaryfirst and see what's going on over there. We recently relaunched our page and with updated tiers and new perks and absolutely new content, which is super fun. So you got to go check it out. We're building a community of creative collaborators. We love hearing people's ideas, and actually they've been really helpful. So we'd love to have you join us. There's some really amazing people in there. And speaking of those amazing people, we want to take a few minutes to thank a few of our little sponsors. Actually, they're big sponsors. Lita Heel, Brian Mullins, Josh Sharp, Lindsay Van Sant, and Debbie Collette. We just want to say thank you very much for supporting us. It's been such a blessing to have you in our community, and I hope you'll forgive me if I slaughtered any of your names. So thank you very much. And now it's our time to talk to Evan. I'm so happy to have you here. You are, this is what your publicist said, that you are one of the rising names in the world of documentary editing and producing, and I have to agree with them. So let me read your bio real quick, and then we'll jump in and get to know you a little bit. All right, ACE Evan Wise is an Emmy-nominated editor, writer, producer with over 20 years of experience in the entertainment industry. Known for his editing collaborations with such acclaimed executive producers as filmmaker Adam McKay and journalist John Heilman, Evan is an accomplished producer in his own right. He most recently served as writer, producer, and supervising editor on HBO's Chimp Crazy, the network's most viewed documentary series over the last 4 years. Evan previously served as the lead editor on HBO's Q, Into the Storm, for which he received a Primetime Emmy nomination for Outstanding Picture Editing for a nonfiction program. The New Jersey native also received 3 news and documentary Emmy nominations for his efforts as supervising editor on Showtime's political docuseries The Circus, netting an ACE Eddie Award nomination as well. As supervising editor, Evan oversaw post-production for both HBO's The Anarchists and Invisible Plot, helping to shape each show's evolving narrative in real time. Evan, I just have to say, you have been living in crazy town, it sounds like, for the last, I don't know how long. Those are some amazing projects. It's so great to have you here to talk about them.
Thank you. Yeah, they are crazy. They are often crazy.
And the first one is Chimp Crazy that we're going to talk about today. And I heard that just the series finale just launched on Sunday, right?
Yep, sure did.
Yeah, talk to us a little bit. Give us the log line of this series. I definitely want to talk a lot about that during this episode.
Well, Chimp Crazy is a 4-part series on HBO, and it follows a woman who has a very close connection to a series of chimpanzees, and one of them goes missing during a legal battle with PETA to remove them and place them in a sanctuary. That's kind of the long line.
Yes, and we just talked a little bit about there being cliffhangers at the end of each episode, and that's definitely the case with yours,
Yeah,
for sure.
we lucked out. I've never had better cliffhangers in my entire career, and it's really awesome. Yeah, it's just like a gift from the story, a gift from all the people who made the cliffhangers work. Yeah, it was really fun.
All right, so before we get into that a little bit more deeply, I want to back up a little bit. Uh, I want to hear about you, really, and how you started in this business. I want to get to know you a little bit better.
Sure.
So, I read in your bio you're from New Jersey. So, talk to us a little bit
Unfortunately,
about, like growing up and how you decided to get into this business, how it all started, and take us down that road.
sure. I was like a young skate punk in New Jersey, and I would just make skate videos with my friends when I was like in middle school. And then when I got to high school, I took some technology class. I don't remember what it was called, and there was a video editing software that they let us use that was like the most basic, the worst video editor ever. But I got to use that when I was like 14 years old or 15, and I just knew like immediately. I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. So I started editing in that class, and then a couple years later, there was another film class, like a more of a theory one, and it was with like that cool teacher in high school that like
Mhm.
he would like go into the city and play jazz piano on the weekends, and he probably like smoked a lot of weed, and he was just like that teacher, and he would just show films to us when we were like 17 or 18 that we would never have access to or never hear about, all kinds of interesting stuff. And he played Paradise Lost, which is a documentary that was on HBO in 1996. It was about the murder of these three young boys in Arkansas, and the local police kind of pinned it on these three metalheads who listened to Metallica and were all black and were super weird. And they ended up going to jail, two of them on for life, one of them on death row. And the whole time they were filming a documentary, and then they ended up making three of them. And by the third one, they got these guys out of jail. They didn't do it; they were wrongly convicted. And the film was so interesting and so provocative that it raised awareness, and all these people kind of like bought into helping these three guys, the West Memphis Three, and eventually got them out of jail. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is what I want to edit. I want to make documentaries. Um, and then I went to film school. I did that, and I was like an editing major. And everybody was like making their, writing their scripts and shooting their narrative, whatever's. And I just wanted to make docs the whole time. And that's all I did was I just made docs. And then I got out of school, and I got a job I was a logger on a documentary about snowboarding that got put out by Universal Pictures. And I got the job because like I called them up, or I saw an ad and got in contact with them. And then I was like, hey, I know how to use an Avid, and I've been snowboarding for my entire life. And they were like, you're hired. So then I was just logging footage all day and like getting paid to watch snowboarding videos and getting paid to watch 4 hour long interviews with like the most famous snowboarders ever. And it was like, I would have done it for free. Um, and yeah, then it all just kind of snowballed from there. And there's a lot of nonfiction work in New York. There's not a lot of scripted work in New York. So I was lucky just being where I was that I had access to a great job market. And yeah, it all just goes from there. You meet one person on a job, and then they hire you on the next one, and then somebody else hires you on the next one.
All right, so I want to go back and just ask a few other questions. So, film school, where'd you go to film school?
I went to School of Visual Arts in New York.
School of Visual Arts in New York.
Yeah.
And do you think that it's important to go to film school, or do you think that no? Tell me why.
I mean, it can be good, but it's not necessary. It was good for me because I was 18 and stupid, and it allowed me to mature in a controlled environment. And I think that could probably apply to everybody. And it gives you access to the things you need. I mean, it's different now. Like, editing systems are cheaper, and you don't need an Avid Adrenaline box and, Digibeta decks and all that to edit. You just need a laptop or your phone. But being in film school in the early 2000s, it's like, oh, I have access to all this stuff, and I have access to cameras, and I have access to free labor with all of my friends that I'm in school with. So you can say, hey, I want to make this thing. Will you help me? And, you don't have to pay them. Or, I mean, I guess you should if you could, but nobody did. So it's great that it gives you access to like-minded people and the equipment. And it's also a great place to make mistakes before there's really consequences.
Yeah.
But you don't need it. You can learn a lot by watching films. You can learn a lot by reading books. You can learn a lot by just talking to other people. And I know plenty of amazing editors and filmmakers who didn't go to film school, who, studied history. Like one of my closest friends that I worked with on Chimp Crazy, Chuck Divac, he's like a history major. But he's one of the most brilliant editors I've ever worked with. So you don't need, I mean, he took film classes in college, I suppose, but like he didn't go to like film school.
Right.
So you don't need it. I mean, if you want to go and you can, and it's a resource you can afford, like I wouldn't talk people out of it, but if you couldn't go to film school and you're like, oh, that's it for me, like that's not true.
Yeah, that's kind of what I tell people. I mean, I went and got a classical liberal arts education. My major was theater, but it wasn't, I wasn't in a theater school. And it was really great because I was able to do those things, but I got a liberal arts degree, which has been helpful in a lot of other areas. So, yeah, I think it can be good either way. It just depends on what it is for you, kind of what you need, what you're interested in. All right. So, moving on, you threw out a term logger, and we do
Yeah.
have a lot of first time, people who want to be documentary filmmakers and they're starting out in their career. And you briefly described what it was, but I do like to educate our listeners. So, why don't you tell people what a logger is?
A logger is as low as you can get. It's like the very first entry level position. And basically, you could call it a transcriber. Sometimes you hear it called that. So if you're a transcriber, you're basically just like watching everything and transcribing. And now like AI does that a lot. So there's not that much opportunity for that. But as a transcriber, my job was like, we were working on a snowboarding documentary. So they would be like, here's the 20 best snowboard videos from the last 10 years, load it into the Avid and watch it. And then every time you see someone do like a rad trick, put a marker on it and write down what it is and how good you think it is. And then the editor or the director will go back and see that. So basically you're just watching everything. And I'm making decisions about what's good or what's not. And granted, then I was 20 something years old and didn't know up from down. So what I thought was good wasn't necessarily what was really good, but the director can take that or leave it. But it just allows them to access things like, okay, you can do a word search. Like I need someone talking about half pipe. So you type in half pipe and boom, like everything that says half pipe just kind of comes up. And then
That's what Avid's good for.
Yeah. But it's a really great position to be in because it's like low stakes. It's hard to screw up. You can kind of learn on the job. And you also, what I was doing when I was in that position was I was like looking at everything. And then I would look at what the editors did and be like, okay, I know everything that's here and I'm seeing what they chose to use and how they chose to use it. And then I would think about, well, why did they do that? Or I'd ask them like, hey, I saw all these things that were cool and you chose this one. Like what stood out to you that made you pick this instead of everything else that I also thought was good? And then remember that and learn from that. And that will affect your judgment and affect your taste. And like, that's how you mature as a creative.
And then what are the next steps up? If you were to tell somebody that's interested in editing, you went from a logger to a
assistant editor.
Mm-hmm. And what does an assistant editor do?
Assistant editor. Well, when I was an assistant editor, I was loading tapes, which isn't a thing anymore. Unfortunately, well, I guess not unfortunately. So I was like taking the tapes, digitizing them into the Avid, and then organizing things for the editor, importing music off of CDs, which isn't a thing anymore. It's so funny because I like everything that the assistants do for me now. Like I don't know how to do that. Like it's passed me by, and I feel stupid when I talk to them. Sometimes I'm like, man, you're great. So yeah, you organize the footage that comes in, and then back then you would develop a relationship with your editor, and then you would say, hey, what do you want me to do? Or they'd say, hey, you know what, I have this scene here. It's just interview bites. Like put some music under it, put some B-roll over it. Like it's 6 minutes long, make it 4. And they would kick you little things to do. And you would do them. And if it was good, they would keep it. And if it wasn't, they would redo it. But then when you do that, you do the same thing as when you were a logger. You go, okay, I made this thing and I thought it was good. And what parts did they choose and why? And then you have to learn from that. Or you look at the sequence afterwards and like, I used to do the X Games for ESPN a lot. And these guys were using like all these crazy effects and I didn't know what the hell they were. But I would go into their timelines at night because I was working at night. And I would like look at all the little things that they're doing and be like, I don't understand. I know what this looks like and I know it looks good and I want to learn how to do that. And I would like recreate it in my mind, like looking at their timeline and just like reading their timeline and trying to cram it into my head.
Ah, that's fascinating.
So
yeah, you really are a good student of life, and you really are, eating up this your environment to try to figure out how to be better.
Yeah, you have to. And like it's a bummer now because like I feel like the assistant and editor relationship has changed so much that it's really difficult for assistants to move up and to develop creatively. And that's so important because like, I'm going to be dead one day and somebody else is going to have to do this. So they need to learn how to do it. So if you're an assistant out there, I would beg you, ask your editors, like, what can I do for you? Do you have a scene to cut? Can I do something? Because like, we're not always thinking about like you, but if you ask us, like, we'll give you stuff. Like, especially if you want to edit, if you're an assistant and you want to edit, tell your editor. It's so important because there's plenty of assistants who don't. And I don't understand that, but that's fine. If you just want to be an assistant or you want to be a post soup or you want to, go take a different route or whatever, that's cool. But if you want to edit, let your editor know because that was us 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And like, we love that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great advice. All right. So then I asked you earlier about watershed moments in your career, about how to level up, right? A lot of people listening are wanting to know how to get to the next level in their career. I mean, looking at your credits is sort of mind blowing. And, tell me how you got there.
I mean, it sounds like such a typical boring answer, but like you got to work hard and you got to work harder than everybody else because people notice that and you need to be eager and you need to ask questions. If you don't know, if someone asks you to do something and you don't know how to do it, ask them because it's better to do that than to screw up and then they get mad at you and then you set them. But really, yeah, you got to work super hard. Always try to work with people who are better than you because like if you're the best person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Right. Yeah.
So like seek out shows, and I mean this is easy to say, but like try to seek out shows that you like and that you want to watch, or editors or other people that you think have a great resume or that you inspire you, and like try to keep the company that you want to become. And it's hard to do because especially now because like a lot of people are working from home and stuff, but honestly, like, I get emails whenever I have a show come on the air. I'll get like emails from people I don't know. They're like, "Oh my God, I love the show, blah, blah, blah." And like, do that. It's cool. It makes me feel good because you watched my stuff and felt moved. And then, maybe one day I'm looking for an assistant and I'm like, "Oh, I remember that person. They emailed me," and I'll hit them up and talk. And if they're the right person, then hire them.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So,
but in your own particular life, what was like the first moment, where you went from a logger and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I got this job"?
Well, it was after being a logger. I mean, I was an editor for a while, for like 10 years, and I was working on things that were fine, nothing.
Makeup videos.
I did a lot of makeup tutorial videos when I first started because I worked for this company. And the owner, his brother was married to Bobby Brown, the makeup artist. And they had this account with her where like she produced all these videos for her website. And like they would play these videos like on a TV on the counter at Macy's of people getting their like, beautiful models getting their makeup done. And I edited all of those. So yeah, I did a lot of that kind of stuff. But then the first like turning point in my career was this show called The Circus. It was a political documentary series on Showtime. And the company that did it. It's called Left Right. They're in New York. And I had worked there and done some other shows. And The Circus was kind of like this like shining star in their roster. And I knew it was going to be cool. And I'm interested in politics and I wanted to work on it. And I knew the showrunner because I had done a show with him a year or two before. And I just said, "Hey man, I want to do The Circus." And then, when they needed editors, he called me, and like it didn't work out for the first season because of scheduling stuff. But I ended up coming in to help out on Saturdays when they needed it because there's a lot of hours on that show. And then the second season came about, and I did the second season, and I did the third one, and the fourth one, and the fifth one. And The Circus is what I would credit as making me what I would consider a good editor, because I was working with editors who were inspiring. I was working with a showrunner who was inspiring and who could guide people in the right way. And I learned how to edit music on that show, which I think is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had a crazy turnaround. It was like a 5-day, like they would start shooting on Sunday, or they start shooting on Monday. We'd start editing on Tuesday. And then we would lock the show at 7 a.m. on Sunday morning. And then it would air.
It's kind of like Saturday Night Live schedule.
Yeah,
I was looking at the episodes that you did, and it's really like real time. Like what political things are happening right then. We have to talk about them and get them ready for the next week.
Exactly. Yeah. The whole point of the show is that it's happening in real time. And it's, the news cycle is so fast. If you can't get it out there, then
it's not relevant.
And it doesn't matter. So yeah, we were banging out a show every week, and we worked a million hours, and it was, I mean, it probably took 5 years off my life, but
Probably.
it was really enjoyable, and you make bonds with your coworkers, and we all were like, I feel like we were all good editors, but we all became really good together. And
Yeah.
those people are still like my favorite editors. I'm still friends with all of them.
It's trauma bonding. We talked
Yeah,
about that, the
yeah,
real
yeah,
cool
yeah.
trauma bonding.
Yeah, and like, so that was like the biggest turning point. That's when that was like the biggest show I'd ever worked on, and people like would watch it, and I would tell people, "Oh, I do the circus," and they're like, "Oh my god, I watched that." And that's the first time that really happened to me, where I was like, my work is out there, and it's being received by the public, and positively for the most part. So that was like
Right.
really exciting. So that was a huge turning point. And then the other one is when I got a call to do Q Into the Storm for HBO.
Okay.
And the cool backstory to that is there's a woman named Tina Nguyen who is the VP of documentary films at HBO. And Tina and I had worked together like at the time, like 10 something years ago. She was a story producer and I was an editor, and we were working on Chopped, like the cooking show on
Yes.
Food Network. And we just got along really well. And like, I knew that she was good, and she could see that I was good. And I was really young. I was like 26 or 7 at the time.
You don't look older than that now.
I promise you I am. But I was like a young person, and she saw something in me, and she, years go by, and she tried to hire me for various other things, and it wouldn't work out. And then I didn't hear from her for a while. And then one day she called me, and she's like, "Hey, I work at HBO now, and I have this show. It's about QAnon. I think you'd be a really good fit. I want you to meet the director." And I met the director. We hit it off, and then I did that show. And it was a really big show for me. And it's the same as the circus. Like, people are watching it, people are excited about it. Like,
And
people.
by the way, it's about QAnon. So in case people are wondering what that show is.
Yeah. It kind of like it sort of goes behind the scenes of QAnon and tells the story of how it became what it became, and shows the people who are behind it. And in the whole time, we're searching for like, who is Q? And it's really weird and it's really dark, but it was a big show. People watched it, and then I got a primetime Emmy nom out of it, which was like the coolest thing that ever happened to me. And so that was like, and then after that, then I just like became like HBO boy, and I would just like, just do all these HBO series, and it's been a really wild ride. And that was like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. And so here we are today talking about Chimp Crazy. So that leads us right into Chimp Crazy. Tell us how that came about. I mean, this is just an incredible series. And, you got pulled into this series. Is that just because you were working with all these HBO projects? How did that come about?
Pretty much. I mean, I had like a track record with HBO, and I had just finished a series with them called The Anarchists, which was about an anarchist community in Mexico. Like, expat Americans moved to Mexico to start this anarchist community, and like, spoiler alert, it doesn't go well. So I had just finished that, and I was talking with HBO, and I said, "Hey, I'm free. Like, if you guys have anything, let me know." And they connected me with Good Films, which is Eric Good, the director of Tiger King, and his number 2 guy, Jeremy McBride, the executive producer of what would become Chimp Crazy. So I was talking to Jeremy about another series that they had with HBO. And we talked for a while. We had a great conversation, but it didn't seem like the right fit. And we were getting off the phone, and he was like, "I have this, let me send you this thing and call me tomorrow." And I was like, "Okay, sure." And then he sent me a sizzle reel and it had Tanya in it. And I called him the next day, and I was like, "Let's do this."
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like the lead in Tiger King. Can't remember his name at the moment. Yes, that you're like, oh gosh, it's you can't take your eyes off,
Yeah. And like, Tanya was like so charismatic and so interesting. And it seemed, I mean, the story wasn't even halfway through yet, but I just knew, I was like, oh, this is going to be so good. We could make this awesome, and people are going to love it.
Yeah.
So then we started making Chimp Crazy.
All right. So I watched this, I kind of dug into the story, and, as a documentary filmmaker myself, and I told you about this, The Brave Dutch, I've sketched out this documentary series, and it is a big, gigantic story that I've been trying to figure out how to wrangle. And, it really is for pitching purposes that I've made a treatment, but I've often thought, how in the world do you decide, especially when you're doing something live in real time, how long this is going to be, and when you divide it up, and how many episodes you're going to have. So there had to be a lot of that going on. And, at one point you mentioned to me, a unique way that you guys created this series. So let's talk about how this was written, produced, and edited, and how you guys decided the format of the series.
Well, we were doing it all at once. Good Films had been shooting various things chimpanzee related for like 2 years probably before I got involved. And they had a couple of they had shot with a few of the characters, Pam, who you see in the show, Tanya, and the Buck Pendleton Oregon story. So they had pieces from all of them, and they'd been shooting variously over 2 years. And then I got involved there's going to be some spoilers in here. Sorry. I got involved right after Tonka was removed from Tanya's basement. So then, the question became like, okay, what is this? Is it
and Tonka, by the way, is a chimp.
Tonka's a chimpanzee.
We'll put, spoiler alerts in the beginning.
Sorry.
We can't really talk about it without, spoiling things. So,
yeah. So, I sat down and it was just me. I was the only person on. And we're like, okay, what is this? And the true answer was that I said is like, I don't know. There's a lot of footage here. There's a lot of things. You have all these stories. I'm not sure how they connect. But there's something. We knew it was something. And like worst case, like it's a feature. But I think people.
And was there a point of view? Like, was there a point of view at the beginning, or was the question, these are interesting characters? These are interesting characters. They are unusual.
Yeah.
People should learn about them. Or was there a point of view?
Well, no. And I think one of the things that I like about the project is that like we kind of don't have one, because like it's easy to make the film that's like, oh, keeping exotic animals is bad and the people who do it are monsters. But it's more interesting to me to be like, okay, this is a thing that's happening. It's probably not good. Why is this happening? What can we learn about it? Like, you don't want to just like dunk on them, because that's not interesting to me. So we try to sort of just show what's happening. And, Tanya has a very clear point of view about what she's doing. PETA has the opposite point of view. So we presented both, and we leave the viewer to decide. We all have our personal opinions, but we tried to be very non-judgmental in that, and just let, the people who think this is terrible are going to think that. The people who think that it's fine and that PETA are monsters, they're going to think that. So we just made the film like, here's what happened. There's a lot of crazy stuff, and then people can take from it what they want.
Well, I would have to think that Tanya and the others would have sensed that motive in you. Otherwise, they would not have opened up and shared with you as much as they did.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I wasn't in production, but they always said, we want to make sure your story gets told. And that was really important to Tanya, because people had tried to tell her story and they always just take the salacious route. Like, oh, crazy monkey lady, chimp in the basement. You're crazy. You're crazy. You're crazy. And the production team didn't approach her that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you were talking about filming, writing, and editing all at the same time. Now, how in the world do you do that? Do you start with a general idea and you're just filming and you're trying to figure out what the story is as you're going? How do you do that? How do you write and edit at the same time?
It's really hard, but it's also like, once you do it, you're kind of like, oh, how do you do this and be successful in a different way? But yeah, you're building the plane as you're flying, and you hope that you can land. But you just sort of start from the beginning, and then when you see a hole in the story where you don't have footage, or you think, oh, it'd be really interesting to talk about this here, then you can go shoot it. And it's great. Like, rather than just like shoot everything, turn off, put the production mobile in the garage, lock the keys away, and just edit. And then maybe you'll get a pickup here and there later. It's like everything on this show was always active. Like, and that's one of the great things about good films, is that like when you work with them, you have the ability to just go get what you need. It's like, okay, we got to go get this thing. Like, all right, well, let's get the shooter, we'll get the field producer, we'll get the sound guy, and get the plane tickets, and you go.
And so did you find a situation where there was a hole in your story and you thought, man, this is not a great way to tell it. It's not very exciting. So let's find a different way to tell this story.
Yeah, yeah. A perfect example of that is in episode 2. There's a Zoom hearing trial between Tanya and a federal judge in Missouri, and it's Tanya and PETA and the judge, and PETA's calling witnesses, trying to prove that Tonka the chimpanzee is alive, and Tanya's insisting that he's dead. And one of the witnesses that PETA calls is a forensic anthropologist who's trying to talk about cremation and how the cremation process works, because Tanya claimed that she cremated Tonka at a temperature that wasn't correct, and she had the ashes and the ashes looked like a very fine powder. And PETA was trying to prove that that was wrong, and they had this guy come in, and he was a great expert, and he really knew his stuff. He's got a wild resume, but it was boring. And it was literally us filming a Zoom call. So it's like, okay, camera on Tanya, camera on the computer screen, and then the guy on the screen is this big, and he's a very dry academic man. And we were just like,
but that's an important part of the story.
It's super important. It's pivotal to the story. And we were like, how do we make this better? Because like no one is going to want to watch this. So I was talking with Chuck Divac, the guy who cut episode 2. And we were like, what do we do? What do we do? How do we get out of this room? Because the Zoom hearing is like 5 hours long, and the scene in the show is probably like ended up being like 10 minutes. And that's like a long time.
Yeah.
In TV time. So we were like, how do we get out of the room? Okay, what if we just get this guy? His name is Dr. Snow. What if we get Dr. Snow and we just talk to him? And we're like, okay, that's step 1. We're out of the room, so that's more interesting. And then Chuck goes, what if we have him demo what it's like to cremate something? Like we'll send him to a crematorium. We'll buy a 20-pound turkey from the grocery store. We'll throw it in the thing, turn on the oven, and then boom. And then we called Dr. Snow, and he was like, yeah, let's do it. But by the way, you can't do it with a turkey because the bones are different, and it won't be similar to what it would be like to cremate a chimpanzee. So he was like, but you could buy a bunch of pig bones or beef bones and like big pieces of meat. And we're like, well, great, let's do that. So then we say, hey, we really want to get this guy. We want to take him to an animal crematorium, and we want to go through this process so that he can show us the crematory process rather than just tell us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's very interesting because nobody ever gets to see that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't know the details of cremation. Like the bones come out, they still look like bones, and then you have to put them in a machine and grind them up. And, we kind of asked our friends and our loved ones, like, hey, do you know how this works? And everyone was like, not really. You just think of cremains. It's like you get the bag and there's the stuff and that's it. So we're like, okay, then this is a process that we need to show. And it also helps prove a point that's important to the story. So then Good Films made it happen. And then we got this really fun, bizarre, memorable scene that really helps propel 102 in a time when it might have been a little boring, and it just immediately becomes interesting and visual.
Yeah. And you can do that because it's not all locked down and finished. You're in the middle of writing and filming all at the same time.
Yeah. And like another example is like in that same hearing, Tanya talks about this character, Sai, and they speak about him kind of not very clearly. And when I showed up, I was watching the footage. They're like, who's this guy, Sai? And then I was just like Googling and I found this dude, Sai, who owns an animal sanctuary in Ohio. And I was like, this is the Sai guy. He's really interesting. Like, let's go to Sai's. And then, we go to Sai. Tanya calls up Sai and says, hey, can we come and film with you? And he says, sure. And then that's a big scene in episode 3.
Wow. All right. Well, so now that, you're kind of through all of this and you're looking back, what was the most challenging part as an editor? I know that you served in different, capacities here. What was the most challenging part of Chimp Crazy as an editor?
Probably the amount of footage. We had so much footage. I think we never...
Do you think you've watched it all? Do you think you watched all of it?
I personally haven't watched every frame of it, but amongst our team, we all have, because it's too much for one person to watch. Like, I worked on this thing for 2 years, and we probably had... Our post supervisor was trying to estimate by the size of the folders on the Nexus, and I think it was like 12 to 1,400 hours worth of footage.
Wow!
And it's over like a 4-year period. So just dealing with that amount of footage was pretty challenging, and like keeping it all in your head and remembering like where things are. It can be tough, but when you have a
Now,
whole team to watch it, and okay, so somebody like becomes an expert on this like month or this scene, and then if you're cutting something that's from there and you say, oh hey, where does anyone ever say this here, or was there anything that struck you that was interesting because I'm having trouble here, and then they'll say, oh, this and that, and then you help each
yeah,
other
that
out.
was going to be my next question. You're the supervising editor, not just the editor. And so that meant there are other editors under you. So talk to me about that hierarchy and how that
I don't want to
works.
say under me, like we work together.
All right, you work together.
But sure. I mean, I cut the first episode, and I wrote that the first version of the outline with Tim Moran, our brilliant story producer who I've worked with for years. And then, and the first episode, the first outline is never how it really is, but we got
No.
it started. And so, yeah, I kind of had a rough cut of the first episode, and then we brought in Chuck Divac, a very close friend of mine who I've worked with for 10 years, almost. I mean, our resumes are strangely identical, almost. So he came in, and since I had already had the first episode kind of roughed out, it was like, all right, well, Chuck, you started episode 2. And we kind of had an idea of what it was going to be. So he started working on that. And then, we would go back and forth helping each other. Like I would cut a scene for him and he would cut a scene for me, or I'd say, hey, take a look at this. I can't be objective. What do you think? And we'd help each other out. And then when episode 2 kind of got into a good place, then we hired a third episode, Adrian Gitz, who I did not know, but who was excellent and has a ton of experience. And then the next after that was Doug Abel, and on the 4th episode. So it sort of just like cascaded, and we would all just kind of help each other out. Like some people ended up working on one episode more than others, but everybody had something to do with everything. And we made a conscious decision to credit everybody on every episode as an editor, because that was really important to me and to everybody, because one of the sad things about series work and the awards is that you pick one episode to represent the whole series. And then it's like, if somebody didn't edit that episode, they get left out. And it's like, but they contributed so much to the series. And because we all contributed so much to the whole series, we were like, okay, we're going to lock arms where everybody's going to be an editor on the whole series. And they were, that's true. But like, we wanted to make sure that we all had the same awards exposure.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think it's absolutely true, because you are a team and you did collaborate together and you all make each other better. It's just like, a football team, a quarterback can, he's the quarterback, but he can't do a thing if he doesn't have the line. And
Exactly.
so you definitely need each other, and you all really are responsible for the whole piece. So I think that's wonderful. Now let's talk about editors as writers.
Sure.
What's your point of view on that?
I mean, if you're making a documentary and you're an editor, you are writing that documentary.
Yeah.
Unless someone gives you a script and it doesn't change at all, which doesn't happen, you are writing. And you could be writing with other people, but documentary film editing is writing. And
I agree with you.
It's been very encouraging to see films and series come out in the last few years where the editors are getting that credit, because it's just what it is. Like, you can't argue. I will not accept an argument against that.
Well, you don't have to argue me, because I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I've been in it, and you're not writing with, you're not typing, but you are using people's words, and you are putting the story together, and you're directing the narrative, and you're working with the director, of course, to put that story together. But yes, you are collaborating in order to do that.
Yeah. If you're an editor out there, ask for the writing credit. I've asked a bunch, and I've gotten denied a lot. And the good people at Good Films, they gave it to us, and we were very grateful. And Eric and Jeremy, Eric the director and Jeremy our executive producer, they're credited as writers too, because they were also part of the process. But yeah, ask for your writing credit, because you deserve it.
I think that's great. All right, we're going to turn the page a little bit, and I would like to talk about editors, but a successful editor. What makes an editor successful from the business side of editing? You are an editor, but you are a small business, and you are running this in order to support yourself and make a living. So talk to me about that. How does that happen?
Well, I guess there's different definitions of success, but I mean, do you want to talk about, like, making money and being? Is that what?
Absolutely. Well, you talked to me in the beginning about
Sure.
how passionate you are about educating,
Oh, yeah.
editors about, how to do the business and the backside of editing. So that's what I'm going to get
Yeah.
into now.
Okay. I mean, one of the things that I think is really important is you have to be a good negotiator, and you have to be a good salesperson. And you need to be a good salesperson to be a good creative editor anyway, because basically what you're doing is like you're cutting a scene and then you got to sell it to the director or sell it to the executive producer or sell it to the network. And like you need to get them to buy into your scene. So, but you also need to be a good salesperson because you have to pitch yourself to get hired. Like every job interview is just like you got to sell yourself. You're selling the product and the product is you.
Yeah.
So you have to get good at that. And I think you need to figure out what makes you unique and figure out what your strengths are and lean into those. And and you need to be nice. That's the thing I would love to mention is that like you got to be nice to everybody. Like top to bottom. I mean, you should do that anyway, just like as a human
It's
being.
the right thing to do.
But like to run your business, like nobody wants to work with a jerk. And you could, you could be a really good editor, but if nobody can stand being in the room with you, like then they're not going to be in the room with you. They're
So
going to pick
true.
somebody else. And like so much of being an editor is like managing relationships and being a therapist and listening to people and hearing what they have to say and like internalizing it into the work. So you need to work on your soft human skills because it's everything. Like you need to make people feel confident that you can get the job done, make people feel comfortable around you so that they can be vulnerable and be afraid to fail with you, and you have to be afraid to fail with them. Like it's a very vulnerable creative relationship.
And I think that's hard for editors because they are more comfortable behind the camera. I think
Oh yeah.
naturally, I've seen them be more introverted. I think
Yeah. I mean,
typically.
I'm an introverted person, and I like to work. Like I love having a conversation about what the vision is or whatever, and then we talk about it, and then get out. Leave me alone. And let me do something, and then come back in later.
You
And then
have to say that nicely. You have
oh
to
yeah,
say
yeah.
that.
I mean, it's easy to say nicely, but like some people just like to be in the room, and I really don't like that
Yeah.
because I know that they're not like looking over me, but it just feels like that, and it's much more comfortable for me to be editing alone and then come back and let's watch and let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's there's instances where you can't do that, where there's like a crazy deadline or you need to have like a big back and forth. But yeah, that's how I like to
But
work.
if you're introverted
Mhm.
and you have to sell yourself, how do you do that?
I mean, I think you have to be confident, and that's hard. That's really, really hard, especially if you're new to the business or you don't have like a ton of like big marquee credits. But a lot of the job is confidence, and like if you're confident, people will usually believe you. And
Yeah.
it could be like I mean, it could be a facade, but if you can get people to feel comfortable and then deliver, then you're good. And then even if you're not confident underneath, you've delivered and you've held up your end of the bargain.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So, what are some other things you'd tell somebody in order
Oh,
to have a
yep.
successful editing business?
You need to be a good negotiator. Line producers, they might be nice people, but their job is to get you to do your job for as little money as possible.
Yep.
So you need to learn how to negotiate. Like read negotiation books. Don't try to get them to make you an offer first, like rate wise. That's key. Like know your worth. Don't be afraid to ask for more. Ask for the things that you want. That's that, and that I think that's a big thing just in life. But like kind of what I was saying before, if you're an assistant and you want to cut, ask your editor to cut and see if they'll give you something. Or if you're negotiating, ask for more money. Like I've never gotten more money on a job without asking for it.
Right.
And you'll be surprised how often people say yes, especially if you have a valuable relationship to them and you're proving that your work is good and that you can do the job. Like people like you, like they're gonna want you to stick around. And if you ask for a couple $100 more a week, like they might just give it to you, and they're definitely not going to give it to you if you don't ask for it.
That's for sure.
So
Absolutely.
ask for what you want. Like ask to go film with the guy doing the cremation if you want. Ask for the writing credit because you deserve it, and it's free. And so that's a great argument I like to say is like this is like compliments and credits, like they're free.
Right. That's awesome. All right. Well, this has been super educational. I really appreciate your time, and it is a gift. And your advice is a gift to us. And it is lovely to meet you. I do hope that people will watch your work. From what I have seen, it is very, very, very good.
Thank you.
And you're talented. You have improved your craft. I'm sure from those early days over your hard work. I can tell that you are a go-getter and you like to learn and keep learning. So thank you for sharing all of that learned knowledge with us.
For sure.
We hope you'll come back. Are you working on anything right now?
I'm taking some time off right now because my brain is melted.
I'm sure.
I worked
2
for
years,
2 years
right?
on Crazy. Yeah, 2 years. The longest job I ever had in my life. I'm very tired. So I've just been kind of hanging out, doing things around the house.
Good.
I have some things coming up that I'm not allowed to talk about.
That's totally fine. Well, hopefully when you are allowed to talk about them, you can come back and visit with us. I think that would be amazing. All right. Now, the other thing we usually do is we have a segment that's called DocuView Dèjà Vu. And in this segment, we ask people to bring a documentary that they'd like to recommend. Now, were you prepared for that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Another thing about being a good editor, be prepared.
Yes, that's a good one.
Know what people expect of you and be prepared. Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of have two. I would say Paradise Lost, the film I talked about earlier. It's brilliant. It changed the lives of 3 people who were not guilty of murder, and it's like a great documentary. So that's the first one. And the other one is much, much different. It's called, actually, I want to make sure I get the name right. I have it up here on my screen. It's called Diamond Hands, The Legend of Wall Street Bets.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I hadn't either, but I was a judge for the News and Doc Emmys, I think last year or the year before maybe. And they give you a whole bunch of things to watch. And it's like, it sounds like it's going to be fun, but it's like, it's homework. Although you should do it.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good for the community. It's good for everybody. Do it. So I was watching all these documentaries that I had never heard of, that I never would have had enter my life. And I watched this one called Diamond Hands, The Legend of Wall Street Bets. It's about the GameStop story.
Oh, yeah.
The GameStop stock story from a couple years ago. And there's so many films that are about that. And I was like, oh, great. Another version.
Another one.
Yeah. But I watched it and it truly blew me away. It was like, the way I'm trying to describe it is they created the internet and then filmed it, which I thought was so cool. Cause there's so many parts of stories and documentaries these days that take place online. And it's always like, okay, or we're going to do another Facebook graphic. And sometimes you just have to do that. But they really approached that in a completely different way. And they did it for the duration of the film, because basically the whole thing takes place online. So It's like watching that film is like watching the internet. And they did it in such a fun and weird and humanizing way. And I was totally blown away. And when it was over, I realized a guy I went to college with, Carter Gunn, was one of the editors. And I hadn't talked to him in a very long time. And I wrote him and I was like, dude, this is so good. I want everybody to see this. So yeah, go watch Diamond Hands, The Legend.
And where can we watch it?
I think it's on Peacock. I think it was MSNBC originally. So I'm pretty sure it's on Peacock, but just Google it, it'll come up. It's there.
All right. Really- Sounds awesome. Well, thank you so much, Evan. It has been a pleasure to meet you. And everybody, I highly recommend you go and watch Chimp Crazy and anything else that Evan Wise has edited. So, all right, everybody, you have been listening to Documentary First, where we believe everybody has a story to tell, and you can be the one to tell it. Bye, everybody.